Shove it, man!
Shove it, squad. It's been a while since I've made a video that required actual research, a backstory and an angle. And I get it. I'd rather be doing that too. But these sort of videos are time consuming and difficult during a house move. On that subject, I do have some really big news for the channel coming up in the next week or so. But anyway, this video today didn't matter how time consuming it was, because when I heard about the loss of Daffney, I just had to make a video on it. Daffney is exactly the sort of wrestler I like to focus on this channel. She is an underdog, not talked about much, and had some wacky storylines which should get more attention on the internet than they do. She's featured in a lot of my videos, but I've never made one specifically about her. So call this the official Daffney tribute, call this a punch to the gut, or a fist to the face as the Hawk screeches, or screams the wrestling career of Daffney. I'm going to take you through her entire wrestling career, and at the end of the video I'll give my own personal thoughts on her. To start out with, one of the first things that stood out to me during my research was how short a time she actually had in the wrestling business. You would have thought she was a seasoned veteran with decades of ring experience or time around the big companies, but no, not at all. After leaving university with an acting degree, she applied to join WCW in '99, around the age of 24. She was one of the few female graduates from the WCW power plant. So we start out today's story in 1999. Not something I often say on this channel. I think it really speaks volumes about Daft history to be obsessed with David Flair. She made her first appearance in what was apparently a Nitro Party segment. It was a one-person party that I wouldn't want to attend. Of course, some of you massive Daffney fans out there probably would be into that. David Flair was playing the character of a loose cannon, so it also made sense for his girlfriend to be a bit nuts. She made her first in-ring appearance at Starrcade 1999, saving David Flair from getting hit in the head with a crowbar. Daffney and Flair seemed to get some sort of sick pleasure out of using a crowbar on their opponents. Talking of crowbars, pretty quickly a man would appear on WCW smacking a cheap version of Ric Flair with a crowbar. He seemed to be just as out of it as David, and this guy happened to be named Crowbar. Daffney looked fairly normal at first, except she laughed a lot. She would not have any matches for a while though, as she was not a trained wrestler. I guess while she was managing her lover boy in Crowbar, she was being trained by people such as Shane Helms in the ring. Back to what was going on in WCW, Flair and Crowbar didn't seem to like each other, or they were just both completely Fruit Loops. I'd vote for the second option, but despite that they managed to advance through a tag team title tournament. WCW management Arn Anderson wanted to look after Flair and help him become sane again, but Daffney wanted to keep him all to herself. She seemed pretty happy with her work, and then a wild Slapnuts appeared.
Double J, Jeff Jarrett.
Even in a Daffney tribute, Slapnuts has to take the spotlight away. Slappy drags her off screen so she can't be a part of the tournament final. Despite that, Flair and Crowbar beat Steiner and Nash in the final, and they won the WCW tag titles. What am I saying here? Arn Anderson did smash Nash with a crowbar, but still. Daffney had her own part to play in the run-up to the belt, so Daffney's management seemed to be helping the team. The whole deal with David Flair was trying to get out of his dad's massive shadow, so this group was an attempt at doing that. During this time, Daffney would scream louder and louder during her team's matches to fire them up, I guess. It was the equivalent of Bill Alfonso with his whistle on ECW. She certainly stood out more than most ring valets around this time. Unfortunately, her team lost the tag belts just 2 weeks later after Flair and Crowbar continued to have communication problems. She still loved Flair though. They also lost the rematch, but she debuted a new part of her gimmick where she would wear brightly coloured wigs and tops with strange statements written on them. The group joined up with Vince Russo's New Blood stable, and she seemed pretty close with Russo. David Flair would go up against his dad, which meant Daffney got screen time in some pretty high profile segments. Around this time, Daffney would finally have her first WCW match 6 months after joining the company, against Miss Elizabeth. Two untrained wrestlers. It wasn't exactly much of a match before we got thrown out. A highlight for Daffney was joining Russo and David as they invaded Ric Flair's home, and she got to ride on Space Mountain, but unfortunately just the bed. Rick wasn't there. She brought so much energy to her role it was impossible not to be entertained by her shenanigans. With Russo present, David Flair proposed to Daffney as she continued to get the big storylines. Then something truly bizarre happened. During a mixed tag match with Chris Candido's Cruiserweight title on the line, Tammy Sytch hit a stone cold stunner, but she was distracted and Daffney rolled her up to become the Cruiserweight champion. For some bizarre reason, Crowbar thought he was the champion, despite Daffney clearly making the pin. Daffney asked to settle their squabble like two reasonable adults, so they faced each other for the belt. She debuted a new move here called the Franken Screamer, but it didn't help her win the match unfortunately. Chris Candido interfered and destroyed Crowbar to help her retain the belt, and this time there were no doubts. Surprisingly, Daffney didn't lose the title straight away as she flunked her way to a victory in the next match. Then she lost the title to Chavo Guerrero, so it went downhill. What was weird was Stacy Keibler, then known as Miss Hancock, kept appearing during the matches. This turned out to lead to an affair that David was having with her. It was hard not to feel sorry for Daffney, although if you think about it, she dodged a bullet because it was David Flair. Instead of calling her Miss Hancock, she kept referring to her as Miss Peacock. It seemed to be over for them, but at least she had Crowbar who stood up for her. Daffney then strangely decided to take Flair back and he continued the affair. I'm not sure why he wanted to take her back. Daffney saw it on TV and she cried. I felt bad for her again. It didn't really make sense. He literally asked for her back and seconds later he went to find Keibler. Some people fight over streaks, some people fight over world titles, and some fight over David Flair. Anyway, this all culminated in a wedding gown match at Bash at the Beach 2000. Daffney had come across completely sympathetic in this feud and everyone else was vile people. Daffney had a really good time in this match and stripped David and shoved Stacey's head into his nutsack. Stacey then tried to shave Daffney's head, but Crowbar made the save. Miss Peacock then ended up stripping herself, therefore losing the match on her own account. It ended with a giant cake fight. Yeah, this happened on pay-per-view. It was at this point that I realised Daffney had achieved something that barely any woman had managed in wrestling at this time. She was over in the wrestling business without taking her clothes off. In fact, she was the only person in this match who kept their clothes on. She wasn't done in WCW after this as she moved on to manage Crowbar, who seemed to have a thing for her. Her final match was a loss in a mixed tag against Shane Douglas and Tori Wilson. Her management of Crowbar also helped him as he started to get some pretty good crowd reactions and became one of the main people in the WCW hardcore division for what it was worth. The guy was actually pretty good in the ring and Daffney covered up the areas that he was missing like mic skills and connecting with the fans. Her final WCW appearance came at the end of January 2001 dressed as a cheerleader managing Crowbar. They were both released as a part of budget cuts but the company would go out of business just 2 months later anyway. So that's her time in WCW. She helped people to somewhat care about David Flair and Crowbar, and she managed to get a lot of TV time in 2000 without taking her clothes off. A real rarity for ladies in this period. I'm not claiming she was a great in-ring worker in WCW, because she wasn't, but her character work was excellent. But hold on, we ain't done. Lots more Daffney to see in this video. Daffney was not given a job offer by the WWE and instead she spent lots of time on the independents improving her wrestling skill. She was briefly signed to a developmental deal in 2003, and she also made 2 appearances in TNA in the early days. She actually appeared in the first 2 episodes of TNA in a lingerie battle royal, and apart from her entrance, I didn't see her for the rest of the match, so it was pointless. You'd think they'd have made a bigger deal out of Daffney being there. TNA didn't really have a ladies division at this point, which is probably why she wasn't hired. In 2008, she popped up in TNA again in the audience as Awesome Kong put out an open challenge. She was selected by JB and he said, "I remember you, you're Daffney from WCW." She still had the t-shirt gimmick. This one says luck, and she's going to need that against Awesome Kong. Kong stretched her out above her head in a brutal looking spot. The audience seemed to remember her too from WCW, but it didn't seem to help her as she got completely squashed by Kong. It's worth pointing out that she was now clearly more comfortable taking moves, which she wasn't really in WCW. She disappeared again for 6 months before coming back into TNA as a Sarah Palin impersonator. I really hate this, I'm sorry guys. I was a young guy at this point and I certainly didn't have an interest in politics, especially American politics. She joined a feud against the Beautiful People, teaming with Roxy and Taylor Wilde. She spent a few weeks making fun of the Beautiful People who were apparently Sarah Palin's biggest fans. She had them do a bunch of stupid things like dressing them like idiots, covering them in cow turd and putting mud all over them. They were apparently the only people who didn't know that this wasn't the real Sarah Palin. I'm told her impersonation was pretty good though, and she can only do what she's asked by management, so fair play. She finally got physical after seeing her friends Taylor and Roxy get beaten up, and she took 3 people out on her own. She carried on hanging around using the Sarah Palin gimmick even though it had been revealed that by now it wasn't actually her. She carried on wrestling with this governor gimmick and she got to show off her improved wrestling skills against Madison Rayne, and she won with a small package. The Beautiful People were bad losers and they beat her up and cut chunks of her long hair off. None of her little friends came out to help her, which I think is pretty harsh after she helped them with the Beautiful People. This forced haircut caused her to turn back into the Daffney character, and she was now seeking help from psychiatrist Dr. Stevie, who also had the Idiot Abyss as a patient. Her first pre-recorded segment as Daffney was good, and it showed off her acting ability. Her time in TNA was certainly different to her time in WCW. She was much more of a force in the ring. She even competed in the first ever women's Monsters Ball match due to her association with Abyss and Stevie. It was short and not particularly good, but it still happened. She now seemed to be a hardcore wrestler who wasn't afraid to take bumps. A new part of the Daffney gimmick was that instead of coloured wigs, she now had strange miniature hats. She was using a spinning fisherman suplex as a finish that they called the lobotomy. Raven now joined the group because all insane people must be together. Oh yeah, and she was now in love with Richards because crazy attracts crazy, I guess.
He's mad.
No, he's angry. I'm mad.
Daffney's main focus in the ring was Taylor Wilde. She was still harbouring a grudge against her for not protecting her when she was Sarah Palin. It might not seem like much, but Taylor Wilde was pushed as one of the most important women in the company for a while, so feuding with her was a big deal. This was all leading to a blow-off match at Slammiversary 2009, another Monsters Ball match, except this time it would be good. This time Daffney would team up with Raven to take on Abyss and Taylor Wilde. Daffney got put through a table and she also took a bump into thumbtacks, again proving that she was now a hardcore knockout. The next week they faced off again in a match of 10,000 tacks, with Daffney again coming up short. She spent the next few months floating around the knockouts division. I do have to shout out one particular match she had against Hamada, who was making her TNA debut. They had a 10-minute no DQ match with lots of cool moves, loud chants of "this is awesome," and Hamada putting her through a table with a moonsault to the outside, and she finished her off with a Michinoku driver. Daffney could clearly wrestle, but she wasn't getting that much time to show it other than that. Her next notable moment came at Bound for Glory 2009 as she interfered in a match between the Idiot Abyss and Mick Foley. This ended with Abyss chokeslamming her off the top through a barbed wire board on the outside. This looked like it ripped her in half, and I felt sorry for her watching this back. I guess she really wanted a place on TNA TV and she was willing to do anything to get it. Problem is, when you do spots like this, you risk shortening your career and taking yourself off TV. And she did just that, as it was first suspected that she had broken her arm, but it was later downgraded to a concussion. She was off TV for a couple of months because of this. When she returned, she briefly managed Raven and Stevie again before becoming more of a standard knockout competitor. She did this by not trying to win her matches, but instead smashing people with a toolbox. It did lead to a title match on pay-per-view against Tara, but she came up short. At the time, people were happy to see Daffney, but if anything, they wanted to see a bit more of her. She would turn up in all these 2 to 3 minute matches, hit someone with a box. No, not a brick, a box. And then she'd be gone again. Might have been nice to have seen her, win the title. It was during this time that she had another bad moment on the TNA show. She participated in a lockbox challenge where the girls had a fight over random keys to cases that contained 4 things. A title shot, an open challenge, a spider, and having to do a strip tease. Unfortunately, Daffney ended up with the strip tease case. What proceeded was an awkward moment of television. Daffney didn't want to do it and looked extremely annoyed as she slowly moved her shoulder strap around. This is the opposite of what Daffney's wrestling career is based on. Luckily, we were eventually put out of our misery and Daffney was not forced to do the strip. Although I'm sure that there are a lot of male fans watching now that might have been disappointed by that. The bad times continued to roll for Daffney in TNA as just after this she was badly injured in a dark match against Rosie Lottalove. Rosie had an embarrassing gimmick of being a larger woman who acted like a diva from the late 90s. She was also put on TV before being properly trained in the Dudley's wrestling school. It was during this time that Rosie Lottalove botched an ass drop, smacked her in the head and left Daffney lying motionless in the ring. She did manage to finish the match, but she was rushed to hospital with another concussion, aka a stinger, and I ain't talking Steve Borden, and she also had a bruised sternum. TNA viewed this as a good performance from Rosie Lottalove and gave her a TNA contract. She was rewarded for legitimately hurting Daffney. As mentioned earlier, this was a dark match, so the full match footage doesn't exist. So the main thing you can see here is the ass drop. She jumps in the air, fully landing her ass on Daffney and not on her feet. Upon her return, TNA wasn't really using Daffney and she was mostly relegated to the B-show Explosion. You can expect that Daffney was in an awkward position because Rosie was trained by the Dudleys and they would have held some stroke in the company, which made Daffney look bad more than anything. It surprised me to find out that Daffney was with TNA to the end of 2010. I wonder what Hulk Hogan thought of her. Her final TNA match came in December 2010 in a tag match, losing to the Beautiful People. Her TNA contract was not renewed and it was then revealed that Daffney had filed a claim against TNA for putting her in an unsafe working environment. I'm not sure how different this is to suing someone, but apparently it is, as Daffney revealed in a comment on one of Top 10 Wrestling's videos from the past. Daffney said her wrestling career was over due to the multiple injuries she suffered in TNA and she would not be able to wrestle again. She was pretty much right about that, unfortunately. The case was settled in 2013 outside court. I mean, can you blame her? She had her career ended by being put up against an unsafe worker and doing crazy spots just to help the company. And let's be honest, they didn't give a shit about Daffney at the time. Impact Wrestling can paint whatever picture they want to, but at the time, Dixie did not care about Daffney. That leads me to the last part of this video, the hardest part. I don't want to dwell too much on her death because it makes me sad that someone so full of life, someone who was so willing to break trends, and someone who gave their all is now dead. She posted on Instagram to announce her intentions to commit suicide, and she was announced dead earlier this month. I know I play around a lot and I say a lot of things in my videos, but these are not intended to be taken entirely seriously. Daffney is someone I look up to every day in my work, because being different and trying to find a new angle is something she was amazing at. I hope you can all take something from this video and remember Daffney's life as a positive message. Being different is okay. You can still have lots of friends, even if you are different. You can still be successful. Different makes you unique, different makes you stand out, and different makes you memorable. Don't live your lives in the shadows and be who you want to be, as long as you're not boring. I'm not going to pretend I'm in tune with my own emotions. I barely understand mental health myself, so I'm not going to give you all a lecture on it. But just talk to someone. Even if you don't have anyone you can speak face to face with, there's forums for this stuff. People will listen to you and respond. Rest in peace, Daffney. You're an inspiration.